Who did you say the Cripes was about?
Marco Rubio.
Hello, Doug.
Hello, Peter Rollins. How are you, buddy?
How's it going?
All right, and thanks for being on the show today.
Great to be here.
Peter, where do we find you right now? And what state, country, or state of mind are you in?
Oh dear, the last question's a bad one, but I just come back from Belfast and I'm currently in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Oh, you are. How was your time in Belfast?
Oh, it was wonderful. You know, I needed just to get back and kind of catch up with friends and family, so it was really energizing and good for me.
Great. Well, congratulations on the book. You're on here with Victoria Lynn. She's a sidekick here on the show as well.
Hi, Peter.
Hi there. How's it going?
And I'll tell you, Peter, Victoria was telling me last night she's been reading your book and she's become smitten with you, I think.
Oh, wow.
I'm a bit.
Thank you.
Yes. So congratulations on the book. It's called The Idolatry of God. And Victoria was saying it's so refreshing to read a book that's well written.
Oh, well, thank you. I'll tell the ghostwriter that. He's downstairs in the basement writing the next one at the moment, so I'll let him know later on.
Make sure you give him an extra nice lunch.
Hey, Peter, we were just...
No, you don't want to encourage them, honestly.
I don't want him to get too uppity.
I was just ranting and rambling on. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this before we ask you about your fantastic book, The Idolatry of God. What's your take on the Pope tapping out and quitting early? Do you have a thought on that at all?
Oh, yeah.
I'm conflicted.
Really. I mean, they're never going to tell us the reason. Maybe it's come out, but I was always a little bit concerned about that decision to make Ratzinger the Pope because of his kind of conservatism. But no real concerns or thoughts.
Okay. I'm just perplexed as to how you get to be the Pope and then just decide you're not anymore.
But he is 85. So by that stage, you start to, I mean, dementia is so big. I don't think he's got dementia necessarily, but when you're 85, running a worldwide organization, it's a tough one.
Yeah. All right, Peter, tell us about this book. Victoria and I have both looked at it. I think it's great. You've been working on these ideas for a long time, both in your own thoughts and in the work that you've done in communities, both in Belfast and in the United States. Yeah. And can we take a crack at what we think you're saying in the book, and then you fix us and make it better and tell people why they should buy it?
Well, yeah, okay, go for it.
All right.
Fear and trembling, let me hear.
All right. So here's some of the things I think that you're trying to argue for in the book. That as human beings, we have a propensity toward a kind of confidence that moves into certainty, and that human beings become convinced of their own understandings, and that blends with their notion of God to such a way that we all organize ourselves around worshiping the God of our own understanding without even knowing it. And that the gospel call of Jesus is to put to death the very God that you think you're worshiping, believing in, following, and finding a kind of freedom in the fact that whatever God you would be pursuing, following, connected with, thinking about is somewhere only available to you when you let go of the faith that you think has brought you to a place of connection with God.
Yes.
That's...
Oh, go ahead.
Is that not it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a way of approaching it. I mean, my main concern, I suppose, but is why I would want people to actually doubt. I mean, yeah, that's a good summation, but the question is really, well, is it negative to have certainty? Is there a problem? And really the core of the book, and it's certainty and satisfaction, so we need to touch the satisfaction one as well, which is probably the more primary aim. But it's at saying that we use religious certainty and political certainty and cultural certainty in order to cover over our own doubts and brokenness, and so as not to be able to face up to our own inner conflicts and antagonisms. So in other words, I'm not saying, and I was on a show where an apologist was trying to say, are you telling me that I should doubt? And I'm saying, no, I'm not asking you to doubt. I'm saying that you already are. We just repress it. So for example, the people who say, everything's in God's hands, we still put a lightning rod on top of the church. Or if we say, well, if you have enough faith, God will heal. We still know that if there's a serious illness with our child, we call an ambulance. In other words, we do have doubts and unknowing, and the problem is not having doubts and unknowing, but not facing up to them.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about, as you've tried to construct this idea of doubt in contrast with certainty, because a lot of people put doubt in contrast with faith, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like you're calling for people to be people of faith and not people of certainty. And so I would imagine you've been in enough conversations. I mean, I've had a few of these with you too, and I've seen you with other people in them, but with this book in particular, where they think that you're calling them to doubt or to acknowledge or to live with or to become comfortable with or partner with doubt as a way of letting go of faith. But I feel like you're doing something different than asking people to not have faith.
Absolutely. I mean, today, faith has become a way of pretty much saying, I believe in something without sufficient evidence. So broadly speaking, in the US and America today, people will say, I have faith that there's cheese in the fridge. Somebody could have eaten it, but I have faith.
Right.
And yet, what I'm arguing is actually that faith has nothing to do with epistemology, with what you think or don't think.
Mm-hmm.
And take an example. If you believe the world is meaningful, you believe that there is an ultimate cause, but you don't love, I would argue that you cannot help but experience the world as utterly meaningless. But in contrast, if you love, even if you believe the world is utterly meaningless, I would say that you cannot help but experience the world as utterly meaningful. And, like food becomes communion, a walk becomes a way of experiencing the beauty of nature. And my argument is that the word faith actually describes that. It describes a way of being in the world in which you see it as invested with depth and beauty and meaning, regardless of whether you think that it is meaningful or not, that you can't, it's a protest against. And by the way, that's why I argue that Christianity is anti-wisdom. Because traditionally, the wisdom tradition says that everything is, ultimately meaningless. But the various wisdom traditions come up to the idea of life is just life and being is just being. And so you see in Christianity this rejection of wisdom. But the issue is it's not an intellectual rejection of wisdom. It's rather a refusal to embrace it. It's a sense of saying, I cannot help but experience the relationships and friendships and world that I live in as invested with a profound beauty that enriches my life.
So talk about how you see someone gaining that perspective, seeing the world in that way, understanding those realities as being different from the other kinds of certainty and satisfaction narratives that seem to be so destructive.
Yeah, and this gets us to maybe the central idea of the book, which is satisfaction. So I argue that there's two basic things that we want, is certainty and satisfaction. In terms of the satisfaction, we feel a sense of there's something out there that could make us whole. We feel incomplete. It might be if I get a certain amount of money, if I marry a certain person, look a certain way, worship a certain God, there's something out there that's going to make everything okay. And everywhere we turn, people are saying this, advertisements, magazines, everyone is saying, we have a product that will make you feel better. And of course, I'm arguing that in this huge vending machine, the church has come along and put their product in, God. So God is what will bring certainty and satisfaction and make everything good. And of course, when it doesn't work, the church has got the same problem as every other company, which is how do you try to fix that? So one of the ways, of course, is supplement. Well, you're not praying enough. Oh, you need to read your Bible more, go to more conferences, read more books. Or two, disavow. We really are happy. We really are content. What you find is what communities have to do then is if someone starts to ask questions or show doubt, they have to be kicked out of the community. Not because people feel that they're doubting and that's a problem. It's that the other person's doubt exposes one's own. I mean, if you take, for example, Rob Bell's book, Love Wins, there was a segment of the evangelical community that hated it. Now, you've got to ask why. Why did they disagree with it? Well, of course not. What did the Amish do? They disagreed with the book, but they're just building their barns. They don't care, right? It's whenever you get a community that vehemently disagrees with you, I don't mean just normal disagreement, vehemently disagrees with you, it actually shows that you're bringing up questions that community is facing, but yet has not been able to bring to the surface. So my argument is that the pursuit for something that will make you happy actually makes you unhappy. We're like Roadrunner. The Wile E. Coyote's chasing the bird, but if they catch the bird, it's just a meal, you know? It's not going to make you whole and complete.
So okay, so let me ask you. So are you saying, hey, stop the chase, and that will be more satisfying, right? Like, so.
No, because that's the Buddhist, the Westernized Buddhist response, which I critique. Go ahead, sorry.
No, that's what I wanted to ask you, because it sounds like there are traditions that do that, right? That want to put you into put one into a place of disassociation from their mind.
Yes.
And to live more in a moment, and to find that place of self comfort or self attainment. Yeah.
Well, and we can't. I mean, there's an interesting dialectic relationship between Westernized Buddhism and excessive drive for things. I'm just very vaguely, you'll see management groups will go and have a Zen Buddhist weekend. So what happens is you are able to exit the frenetic activity of desire-driven culture for a weekend, which refreshes you so that you can re-enter it. So of course, I'm what's called a dialectic philosopher. So those things interest me, but I'm going to put that to one side and say, for me, yes, the answer is not the giving up of desire. The idea of somehow you give up this frenetic pursuit. It's a little bit more complicated than that. I'll say it like this. If you love somebody because you're not with them, you know, you're going out with somebody who lives on the other side of the world. You know, it's Valentine's Day, so this is a good example. But that's not necessarily love, because you're desiring them, but you don't have them. You know you love somebody when you miss them, not when they're not there, but when you miss them when they are. Whenever you're sitting beside the person that you love, and there's something about them that is still to grasp, still to gain, that they're a universe that is still to explore. In other words, you desire the person in their presence. What can be called in theology realized eschatology, which means they're there, but in some respects, they're still to arrive. And what I'm arguing is that's healthy desire, that's Christian desire, is not the desire for something you don't have that will make you happy, because that's always perpetually putting off what you have. It's how to find beauty and depth in what we do have, in what we have creating desire, but not in a frustrated way. And that's what I argue is where we find God.
And I would imagine that you wouldn't be comfortable with the kind of worship, church culture worship stuff where someone is saying, I want more of you, God. I have you, but I want more, and I want more, and I want more. Because I'm having a hard time separating out that kind of language that plays out in churches, right? Where people are like, well, you've experienced God, but, you know, there's more to God than you know. So this community wants you to desire God even more and more, because you don't have all that there is of life and faith in God. And I don't think that's what you would be comfortable with. The conclusion someone making, like the sort of gluttonous, you know, buffet of God that you've only touched one part of the buffet, and there's a whole lot more to get from God.
Well, my concern with that is just it starts to mimic kind of like a pub. Now, actually, pubs are good and bad. Pubs are bad if you go and get drunk all the time in them, but they're great if you go for community, right? But what my argument is, often churches like going to a crack house or something is, imagine you've gone through a breakup and you're unhappy. One way of dealing with that is going out and getting drunk or taking drugs, and you'll feel great for a while. But the next day it comes back, and you have to go out again and get drunk the next weekend and the next weekend and the next weekend. Now, my argument is the church is a bit like that you can actually experience this freedom from your suffering in those kinds of songs. They create this amazing buzz, like getting drunk. But the problem is you leave and then you get the hangover and you have to go back. Hence, there's people who go to church every week. You know, I mean, like honestly, all over the place. In this kind of addictive way, you know. Like, contrast that with what Søren Kierkegaard said. He said, what is a poet? A poet is someone who screams and cries in agony, but whose lips are so formed that when they cry out, beautiful music is formed. And he says, when we ask the poet to sing to us again, we are saying, may new disasters befall you. Now, what I'm arguing is, if instead you go to a singer-songwriter and you hear them talk about their suffering, that allows you to access your own suffering and begin to mourn. And for me, the church should be like that. that you should hear the full range of human emotions in the songs. It should be more like, Nick Cave or Bon Iver or something like that. That when you go in, you experience your own sufferings and brokenness in such a way that you can work through them and rob them of their sting.
Nice. Well, how does that not just refine the product so that churches are providing a better consumable for people that's on a greater spectrum than just joy and happiness and confidence and certainty and satisfaction? Also offer people
a little bit of mourning, sprinkled in,
some grief, some honesty. Talk about that, how you imagine communities that don't just add another layer of product to what they're doing, but actually reshape the nature of the community and what it's about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in some respects, I'm aiming for the same thing as Rick Warren and Joel Osteen. I mean, I'm just going about it in a very different way. I'm arguing that it's actually the pursuit of certainty and satisfaction and wholeness and all of that that actually causes deep dissatisfaction and anxiety, that where we have to protect ourselves from the other and causes all manner of conflicts. And then what I'm arguing is the good news of Christianity is life is rubbish and you don't know the secret. And people say, that doesn't sound like good news. What I'm arguing is, no, it's great news. To be able to accept that and embrace it and be able to start not running. Like if you imagine a family sitting around a meal and one of the sons has died, but nobody mentions it. We all know that the suffering is there, just it's not mentioned. But then one person says, oh, you remember Johnny? I really miss him. And someone else tells a funny story and someone else cries. In the very act of facing your mourning and suffering, it brings the community, the group of people together, and it helps bring them to a better place. Like, can I just very quickly outline, I think, how this works?
Yeah, please.
Please.
Yeah. It's very analogous to a magician. A vanishing act. By the way, hocus pocus likely comes from hoc est corpus, which is what the priest says during Mass. So the magician has a structural similarity to the priest. Yeah. And in a vanishing act, there are three things, which you'll know if you've ever seen the film The Prestige. There is the pledge, the turn, and the prestige. The pledge is where you give an object like a rabbit to the audience. Then you put it behind a curtain. And the turn is where you remove the curtain and the rabbit's gone. Mm-hmm. And then the prestige is when the rabbit comes back, pulled out of a hat. Now, of course, it's not the same rabbit. The first rabbit's dead, but this is a second rabbit. Now, my argument is this is enacted in Christianity in the Garden of Eden, but we won't go there. But then you see it in the temple of the crucifixion. You have the object, the Holy of Holies, that which will make you whole and complete. You have the curtain, the temple curtain, which hides it so that we can't see it. And you have the court of the Gentiles where we are all hanging out. And then Jesus, the divine illusionist, he does the turn. He rips the curtain in half, and we realize there's nothing in there. This Holy of Holies, there's no god gas, there's no wizard. It's not all the socks that you lost in the washing machine. It's just empty. But then there's the prestige. And the prestige is where the return of God in the body of believers. And we enact this every week in communion. There is the pledge, the bread and the wine, the turn, the disappearance in our bodies, and the prestige, we are the body. In other words, we get back God, but God in the depth of being. We get back whatever was promised by the idol and never given. We find a way of truly living before we die.
It's fantastic, and I think really helpful to people. How does it not devolve into someone saying, that is so much more satisfying of a narrative, right? Like, that's the thing I want. And when someone performs or a community embodies or my mental state is in tune with the pledge and the turn and the prestige, man, that was great. How does that not over time just become the same thing that look at the scripture, there's, it's the word of God, and everybody in the church raises the Bible above their head, and they say, now you're going to read it, and you're not going to understand it, and then I'm going to explain it to you, and it now is alive and in your brain, and you're like, wow, it's really all there.
Yes, that's why. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not even a what if; it will. Any system can become a defense mechanism.
Okay.
And so I have this with my own, and people who come to my group and go, "Oh yeah, I really love this died and brokenness stuff." And
Yeah.
you go, "Why?" And it's like, well, just because you say it's cool, you know. It's like, no. This is and this is why psychoanalysis is important. Because if it used to be that if somebody came to a psychoanalyst and you said, "Why did you beat that person up?" They go, "Oh, I don't know. I just wanted to." And you go, "Well, what's your relationship with your mum like, or whatever, right?"
Yeah, right.
Now you go in and they come in and you go, "Why did you beat that person up?" "Oh, and my relationship with my mum's really bad." So the problem the analyst has is the person already has a psychoanalytic interpretation. So what do? So sometimes the analyst has to go, "Stop blaming your mum. You're just an idiot," right? And the idea being that the liturgical, and I'm in what's called the radical tradition. The radical liturgy is not about talking about this. Talking about it's important, but it's about enacting this existentially. And by the way, this is my main critique of the liberals and progressives, of course, is right. Whereas fundamentalists and conservatives say, we just fully believe in this God who's going to make everything better, right? But of course don't, because there's they put the lightning rod on the top of the church. The liberals are too clever for that. They're like, oh, I have doubts and brokenness. I don't, and they do all of that. But then you look at the liturgical structure, and the liturgical structure is fundamentalist. They don't need to be fundamentalist because their structure is fundamentalist on their behalf. It's like a mother doesn't have to believe in Santa Claus. She gets all the psychological pleasure of the belief as long as her child believes in Santa Claus. We have to have the church believing in the idolatrous God so that we can play shop. The radical tradition says, and the documentary Kamari is brilliant on this, says we have to liturgically enact this death of the idol. We need songs that critique. We need prayers and sermons of brokenness and unknowing. And it's not about intellectually feeling it. It's about existentially undergoing it.
And you think that helps bring clarity and honesty and openness to allow people to embrace the joy and in the present moment, or the mystery and desiring what they already have, rather than setting up an idol for something that's going to make them whole. That by enacting the destruction of the idol, that's going to bring people to that.
Absolutely. That's the core argument. What I'm trying to show is how the idol comes into existence, and that's why I use the theological terms original sin, prohibition, all of this. But I explore how the idol comes into existence, why we think there's something that will make us whole and complete. I try to show how that actually devastates us. And in fact, if you look at why most people go to therapy, it's because they don't desire anything at all. If they say they lose someone they love, they suddenly, all the other things that they used to get pleasure from, reading, walking, all of that, suddenly are drained of color. And there is no sense of depth to existence at all. What I'm arguing is the idol breeds this lack of desire and experience of depth. And that the role of these communities, what Paul Tillich said, is to help us experience that depth, which will have political, material transformations in how we interact with others. So it's giving up the idea that there's something out there that will make you whole is the step towards getting something more. And by the way, this is why the liberal critique of fundamentalism is problematic, because the liberal critique of fundamentalism says, you guys believe too much. You believe so much, it's violent, right? And of course, the fundamentalists will never respond to that because they think, no, we've got to believe more. No, the radical says fundamentalists don't believe enough. In other words, I was once at a church and they had this when I was a fundamentalist, and the pastor did a talk on healing, and at the end, the person beside me, this is true, gets up, falls over, and breaks their arm. Right. So of course I'm the true believer. I bring them into a room and start praying for them. But somebody else brings the leader up, the leader who just gave a talk on how God heals, who happened to be a doctor. He took one look at the arm and said, get him to the hospital. In other words, the person who didn't believe, whose belief was sustained by unbelief, was the pastor. And my argument is this, that the problem with unbelief is not that it's the opposite of belief. Unbelief is what is required in order for you to continue to believe. So in other words, someone believes that everything is harmonious and works to the good. You can only believe that if you really don't believe it, i.e., because you don't celebrate genocides. You don't celebrate, whenever someone's murdered.
Right.
So my argument is get rid of unbelief, fully embrace your belief. Then you experience its horror, and then you move into where I think Christianity is really situated, which is in a church that exists beyond belief.
Peter, it sounds like in some of the descriptions in the book too, that you want to give people the freedom to know that you're going to that one has to go through these various stages, right? That someone has to sort of buy into the pledge, and you really have to be fooled by the turn in order for the prestige to have any meaning.
Yes.
And it seems like in some ways people might call it, see it through the lens of like moral developmental theory, right? Like you, at certain stages, you're only going to move on to the next stage when you are fully committed to that current spot. How does a community or a collection of churches move people, function with people, guide people, participate with people who are at such varying stages of that, right? How do you have a room where there's someone who's like, where'd the rabbit go, right? And somebody else who's like, don't worry about it. The rabbit's going to show up over here, and it's going to show up in us. And I've already been down that road before. How does this actually? How could this ever work if people have to move through these stages, and they're going to do it with each solution? Because I think you're saying, once you've gotten that moment of prestige, then you go back through the prestige in essence becomes another promise, and then it has to have a turn, and then a new prestige. Like, you're going to continually do that. But how do you guide a collection of people who are at different stages?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a brilliant question, and it's
Say
something
that again.
very
Say that again. Peter?
It's very complicated. I mean, I'll give you one example of what we're doing, and it does work broadly with in a similar way to the documentary Kamari, which I'll just tell you about because probably most people haven't heard of it. It's about a guy from the US who he's skeptical of gurus, so he grows a big beard. He's Indian American, grows a big beard, gets a staff, goes to Arizona and creates a following, becomes a guru.
Really?
What's interesting is then all through the documentary he's going, well, I'm gonna expose myself to these people, right? And so we're all waiting what's going to happen when he exposes himself. But one of the interesting things that happens is he's always exposing himself. He's always saying, I'm not who you think I am.
I see.
I'm a fraud, I'm a fake. But of course, it's like a king saying, I don't have any power. That's fair enough. But as long as he's sitting on the throne, he still has the power. But then at the very end, he shaves off his beard and stands in front of them and says, I'm just a guy from New Jersey. And I won't give the end away, but it's quite powerful. But that's what radical theology does. And what I'm doing is I'm doing a 1-year project at the moment. So I'm working with people for 1 year to try to help us go through these 3 stages. And then I probably will start again with some other people. And the idea is you enter, and the first thing people do is they look to me and they think, Pete's got the answer. Maybe Pete will be able to make me happy and whole or whatever. And then I tell them that I don't. Liturgically, we enact that in the church, and we get people to start questioning that. And then at the very end, we do the apocalyptic move. And by the way, apocalypse means means the tearing apart of the curtain. Apocalypse means, which is of course very interesting to me. The apocalyptic moment is where we tear the curtain away and we say, really, I don't have the answer. I'm just as broken as you. We're all in this together. We have to take responsibility for our lives. And then in the aftermath of that, we might set up a community of people who want to live in fidelity to that insight. But for me, yes, you're always having to go back and help others go through it. And it is hard to have a church where people are all at different levels. It is difficult.
And Peter, then when we're sitting in the midst of our broken idol and we're saying, here I am, beyond belief, it's like, then can you tell us a little bit about the next moment and the next moment? I mean, practically speaking, moment to moment, how do you find as you work your way through that level of development spiritually?
Well, you see, at that point, if this is you, for example, if I meet you and I see that you've gone through this, I've got nothing to give you except to ask you one question, which is, how did you do it? Help me. Because in one sense, without wanting to sound like something out of the Matrix, you just go like, I can't tell what it's going to look like on that side, because that side is where you have to work out what it means. But I can tell you very briefly, there's hints of what it looks like. And it's in people who are able to be silent with themselves, people who are not doing frenetic activity. Because, as I often say, like, I'm not trying to make people depressed. I'm telling them that they already are depressed. They just don't know it, right? And it's like, and people go, I'm not depressed. I go out and party all the time. I'm always out having fun and being with people. And I'm like, Exactly. That's what you would do if you were depressed. You know, is it you cannot face being alone for 20 minutes without the terror coming, without realizing that you're a haunted house full of ghosts. Um, so part of it is it's an exorcism. You will be more comfortable being at peace with yourself. You will find depth and beauty in your life. I will see genuine joy, not in the absence of suffering, but even in the midst of it, an ability to say amen and yes to life. That's what lies at the other end of the idol. People think, oh my goodness, getting rid of the idol sounds so depressing. No, it's the freedom from depression. Because say I think there's a girl who will satisfy me completely, but I can't be with her. And I think if only I could be with her, I'd be happy. That kills me. That's killing me. I need to let that go and still go, well, maybe we could have had a good relationship. Maybe it would have been brilliant, but it wouldn't have satisfied the core part of my being. I would still be broken and facing death. That's what lies at the other end.
And when people are trying to make choices from moment to moment between different options and trying to experience the joy and all of that in the midst of that, but maybe deciding about career choices or family life choices, etc. I mean, how do you make sure that you're not setting up another idol again?
Yeah, well, I think it's a constant tension, and not even a tension. This idolatrous way of thinking, I would argue, is so core to our subjectivity that there's always a pull and a danger, and it's very hard to live. And that's why, to be honest, we do need to, encourage each other and try to set up collectives where we try to live this stuff out. Where where we do the turn every week, and that's why I like communion, is that you reenact the turn every week or every month. You're always reenacting, you're always identifying with one who gave up their identity. With what we're always attempting to have that apocalyptic remembrance.
Yeah, I thought your answer there was going to be, oh, recognize that you will turn that into an idol, and that the propensity of the satisfaction narrative is that any sense of, oh, I found joy and I found the prestige, in that metaphor, that will in and of itself have to be again run through the cycle or deconstructed or
I do think
freed
there is another side, but it's very weird because it's like the idea of a gift. If you give a gift, by definition, a gift has to be unconditional, and of course, it's really hard to give an unconditional gift because as soon as you even feel good about yourself for giving it, you're getting something back. So the paradox the philosopher Derrida brought out was that the perfect gift is one that you don't give anything, the person doesn't know you received it, and you don't know you've given it, right? Because then you can't get pleasure from them, it having pleasure and all of that. And you go, what could that look like?
Yeah.
Well,
in fact, I gave one of those to you last week. You wouldn't know, but I did.
Yes, that's right. Well, it's very beautiful.
I just ruined it just now, but I just couldn't stand it any longer.
Well, it's a beautiful and strange sounding insight because you're like, so, but you take one example, offering forgiveness to somebody.
Right.
You've given a gift, they don't know they've received it. Now you still know you've given it, so you can still go, I'm really proud. But the idea of the perfect gift is a gift that you give at a completely, it's like a heart beats or a bird sings. And people do all the time. Like a teacher, he helps a student out with homework and doesn't think anything of it. So what I'm arguing is, as soon as we start to go, is this an idol? Is my pleasure really pleasurable? Yeah, we're in the cycle. I do believe that there are people, however, who do get to a point, maybe only for brief periods of their lives, where they just are. They simply are, and they are able to be in the world, to be what Heidegger would say, to be in the world. But the real issue with that is you don't know you're there because as soon as you conceptualize it, you're in the idolatrous framework again.
So Peter, I want to ask you two things. Do you have another minute or two with us?
Yeah, of course.
The thing I think that's provocative about your book, and that you are called on the back of it a firebrand, theological firebrand, Peter Rollins, is that you're making the argument that God is the idol. Like, because I think a lot of people would hear this because we do, in religious terms, you talk about idols and, those things that you worship instead of God, right? But I think you're pushing even deeper to say, no, don't sort of try to strip away all of your other idols that make these false promises to you about satisfaction, because there really is a better one, and that's the one that you should be connected to, and that's God, right? You're not saying that. You're saying even that very understanding of God is the idol. Is that
Yes,
right?
absolutely. And this is what's key about the prestige move, is the prestige move gives you back the same object, the rabbit, but it's actually a different rabbit. My
Huh.
argument is that Christianity takes away the God idol and brings back an icon. And it's the difference between an idol and an icon is an
Huh.
icon is that which opens up the depth of the world. So if you look at an icon, you see something visible, but it brings you into the invisible. So if you look at the face of someone you love, their visible, face opens up to an infinite world of subjectivity, right? So that's an iconic way of looking at the world.
Hmm.
And the argument is the idol seems that it exists, and it to exist means to stand out. So the idol exists, it's sublime and beautiful, and it's totally meaningful until you get it. And then you realize it doesn't exist.
Hmm.
It isn't sublime and it isn't meaningful. My argument is the God of Christianity, that post-resurrection God, doesn't exist as such, like stand out from the background, but actually causes everything to come into existence.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when you love somebody, they exist, they stand out from the background of all these other people. Secondly, God isn't sublime. God is the background of which says, look at that person in front of you, they're sublime. And love is not meaningful. God is not meaningful. God is what brings meaning into the world. And that's why God is love is so important, because love doesn't exist. Love calls into existence. Love is not sublime. Love says, look at that person, they're sublime. And love is not meaningful. Love is what renders the world meaningful. But here is the trick. The ultimate act of the prestige is when you let go of God as existing, as meaningful and as sublime, and you engage in the act of love, you discover that it seems as if this divine mystery is the most preeminently existing, beautiful, and sublime of all things. And yet, in the very moment of thinking it, you always reduce it to an idol.
I would imagine you've heard people say that this process of going through a letting go of certainty and satisfaction and confidence at such a deep level is a kind of anti-intellectualism, right? So early fundamentalists in the 20th century in the United States had a decision to make about, were they going to be all distracted by the liberal conclusions of science and philosophy, or were they just going to take this as on faith, or take this as a gift given by God, and not overthink the whole thing? Mm-hmm. Do you hear that critique? Do you hear people saying, boy, when I hear you talking about this and wanting to move away from certainty, I'm trying to live my life in conversations with people who are telling me that what I think and believe is a total figmentation of my imagination and of the community I'm around, and that it's all make-believe. And it sounds like you're wanting me to believe that it's all make-believe.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's fascinating. Fundamentalism is, were you saying fundamentalism is anti-intellectual?
Yeah.
Because I would argue that it's actually intellectual, in that, the strange thing about 20th century fundamentalism is they embrace the kind of philosophical ideas of evidentialism and foundationalism, which are, that, the more evidence you have for a position, the better it is, and you should have a rational foundation. In that, things like creationism are attempts at, it's terrible science, but it is attempts to do science. And if you read fundamentalist apologetics, like some of the original fundamentalists would have despised the rationalism of the 20th century fundamentalism, i.e., someone, as Peter Damian would have said, if one, in Acts, I think it says God, went up, ascended into heaven like on the 40th day, and in one of the Gospels it says it was like on the 4th day or the 3rd day. But Peter Damian said, well, God just kind of maybe made the world twice, or just can do contradictory things. Right. As soon as you try to explain it, you're giving yourself over to reason. So I'd say fundamentalism is more of a perverted form of intellectualism, rather than anti-intellectualism. But my whole thing is actually I'm trying to get to this idea of how to be and how to live, and say that Christianity is not a worldview. It's not a belief system. Right. It's just not. It's just not that for or against. It's a way of being in the world.
Yeah, it's funny. We when we do sermons at Solomon's Porch, the church I'm part of, we read the whole sections of the Bible out loud and sort of let them speak. And we're reading through the book of Mark, and on Tuesday we have a discussion group that makes the sermon together. And it's sort of at the end of an hour and a half or almost 2 hour long sort of discussion through one of the chapters in Mark, it struck us that it's totally inconceivable that a religion could come out of this, out of these writings. Like, honestly, when you read them and you think it doesn't, how did it ever produce a livable kind of system? It's really fanciful to think that could have happened. I mean, it's frankly, it's like a human being who only believes that you're born by coming out of your mother's womb. You know, like if you didn't know that happened and be confident or having seen it once, someone describing it to you would really seem quite bizarre, right? Like, it's just so unbelievable. And I think it's because when you read the Gospels, or even you read the epistles and the other kinds of writings of the New Testament, it seems just unbelievable that you would get a worldview out of that, or that you would get a belief system out of that. Like, there's nothing in it that seems to indicate that that's the direction it's going to go. Well, there's these things that we believe, and there's these worldviews that we take, and we indoctrinate people into these things. That something else happened in Christianity that allowed it to develop as a religious system of worldviews and teachings and so on.
I mean, I would say in many ways, like things like the Gospels are attempts at describing a radical transformation, and it's similar to a dream. Dreams are very, very fragmented and bizarre things, but they actually are attempts to make sense of something that's going on deep within us. So if you come to me with a dream, I don't ask whether it's real or not. I mean, that's just not a question I'm interested in, because I know it's taken from fragments of reality, of course. But what I'm interested in is, what does this dream tell me about your deepest mode of being, your deepest, and so I can ask that question. In the same way with the Gospels, of course, the theologian brackets out the question of, is this happened or not? It's just not the question you ask.
Yeah.
The question is, what does this tell us about the mode of being called Christianity? That's the kind of, that's the simple move is you go, these are testimonies. That's why I'm fascinated by reading them and reading them very carefully, and that's why my books have a very what could be called a high Christology. I mean, they really take the text incredibly seriously, because I think these Gospels are ways of expressing what I would call a new creation, a new mode of being, a new way of living in the world, a life before death.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think you're onto something there, and that this whole notion that there is this is what it will and does look like when people live as a new humanity in a new in a new creation, in a new way, and people are called into that. And well, Peter, give us the last 1 minute sales pitch on the kind of people you think are going to benefit from the book, The Idolatry of God.
Okay,
who's this for? Like, who's going to read this? Is this small group curriculum in your mind? Is it what you do with 12 college students over on a 7-week Bible study? Is it for theologians, for leaders? Who do you see digging into it, and how do they dig into it?
That's always a difficult one for me, because I kind of write for myself in many respects, working through my own issues. But as Kierkegaard said, the more personal you speak, the more universal the message. Oh. And so I find that my work is at its best when I am most engaging with my own knots and internal struggles. And I hope the book does that to a certain extent, and therefore I hope the book can appeal to anyone who knows and who struggles with the idea that, with the oppression of thinking that there's something that will make them happy. If they could only be with that girl or that guy, or they could only get out of their marriage, or they could only get into a marriage, or they could only have that amount of money, or and they realize that this, if only, is destroying them. And is it possible to live outside of that? So I would say, anybody who's struggling with that, I hope they get something from the book. But what I really should say is, if you buy the book, you're certain to get the answers, and you're certain to get happiness guaranteed, or your money back.
Peter, have you seen Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett's play?
Yes.
I kind of felt like it would be so. I had scenes from that play playing through my mind as I was reading your book, but I feel like you get to a happier ending. So that's all good.
Yeah. Hopefully, that's what I think. You've got perfect analogy for where I'm placed is I want I've got there's some similar themes, but I want to bring people to somewhere that is a little bit more fun.
A little less bleak. Yeah, a little more
Yes.
fun. Definitely more fun than waiting
Boy, there
for
you
Godot.
go. Pete Rollins, a little more fun than Godot. There you go. You found somebody that you're more fun than. That's perfect. Peter Rollins, we love you. Thanks for the book. It's fantastic. People should buy it. Don't you think, Pete?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
You don't have to read it, just buy it.
Yeah. Thanks for being on the show, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, Peter.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
I gave him the Breaking Bad soundtrack at the end.